It's the 350th anniversary of the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, and today our tour is all about stars, ships, and the fascinating history of time. I'm Jessica, the museum guide, and today I'm in Greenwich, home to the Royal Observatory and the Greenwich Prime Meridian. Today, the Royal Observatory is a vibrant heritage attraction, featuring a museum, London's only planetarium, a number of different telescopes and astronomical pavilions, and the 17th century Flamsteed House, which was both a domestic residence and the workplace of the Astronomers Royal. If this is your first time to my channel, welcome. I'm delighted to have you here, and I'd love it if you'd hit the subscribe button. If you're a regular viewer and you'd like even more content, including an extra video tour every month and invitations to in-person tours, check out my Patreon link above and in the description box below. It's no coincidence that the Prime Meridian is located in Greenwich, famous for its naval history and associated with maritime history, innovation, and education. Just down at the bottom of the hill, we find the Maritime Museum, Cutty Sark Museum, and the Royal Naval College, famous for its painted ceilings known as Britain's Sistine Chapel. Today, Greenwich is a borough of Greater London, but historically it has been its own region, close to but separate from London. It's been honored with its own UNESCO World Heritage designation, and while it may be a part of London, it really doesn't feel like it. Old Greenwich Castle was otherwise known as Placentia. That was a nickname given by Margaret of Anjou, which means pleasant place. The castle existed from 1427, when the first building, called Bellicourt, was built for Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, through Tudor times, wherein it was the birthplace of Henry VIII in 1491, until 1675, when Charles II ordered it to be demolished to make way for the Royal Observatory on its old foundations. Today, all that remains in the once illustrious royal residences of the area is the Queen's House. This was built in the 1620s for King James I as a gift to his wife Anne of Denmark. Apparently, he gave her this as an apology for losing his temper after Anne shot one of his dogs while she was hunting. I mean, I would probably lose my temper too. King James chose architect Inigo Jones to design the new palace. Now, Inigo was a real character and a favorite of Charles I as well. He designed and produced royal spectacles called masks, and many believe that this house was originally designed as a venue for this lavish entertainment, but I digress. Today, the Queen's House is a royal reminder of the area now known for its museums and naval science. It is impossible to overstate the importance of seafaring to the history of Great Britain, and really to the history of the world. Ships have helped great men and not so great men and a few women discover new lands, learn about the planet, and access resources. Of course, all of these positives have a darker side. Europe's maritime supremacy led to colonization, slavery, and the destruction of the natural world. But no one can argue that ships like these at the Greenwich Maritime Museum changed the planet forever. Too bad that for a very long time, there was no reliable way to navigate them with any kind of accuracy. That's where this building comes into play, the Royal Observatory, celebrating its 350th anniversary this June. See, the two most important things you need to know when sailing are latitude and longitude. Finding latitude was easy. You just look at the angle between the midday sun and the horizon. I love that I just called that easy, by the way, as if I could actually do it. I couldn't. Longitude, however, was damn near impossible. You'd have to imagine the Earth divided into 24 segments, and how were you to know which segment you were currently in? Each segment is 15 degrees apart and is separated by an hour. If you know the time of your location and the time at any given destination, you can calculate longitude. But with no clocks accurate enough to keep time on long journeys, this was nearly impossible. Without this information, ships meandered around, often backtracking and very often getting lost at sea. There's a reason we have that saying. Not to mention horrible naval disasters, like the Scilly naval disaster that we'll talk about a bit later on. In 1675, King Charles II, remember, big wig, nice tights, high heels, he decided to heed the advice of some of the most influential men in 17th century London, men like Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren. They were architects and scientists who helped rebuild London after the Great Fire, as well as Samuel Pepys, then not known for his diaries, but as the chief secretary to the Admiralty, and mathematician and astronomer Jonas Moore. They advised him to build an institute where learned men like themselves could investigate accurate longitude measurement using the stars and the moon. The site they chose was here. Remember, the former location of Placentia. It was remote, on a hill, and already owned by the king. It was perfect. Christopher Wren designed the grand house here, and they hired John Flamsteed to create an accurate map of the stars. He was given the title of the first astronomer royal, and he created this work, the Atlas Coelestis, in 1729. It is a monumental document, the first comprehensive telescopic star catalogue and companion celestial atlas. It contains 26 different maps of the stars as they are visible from here in Greenwich. The star maps are accompanied by beautiful Rococo drawings by James Thornhill. Just look at this one here of Orion. However, as beautiful as it may be, it was just simply too technical for sailors to use. Thankfully, the fifth astronomer royal, Neville Maskelyne, and that name is really not spelled how you think it would be, created the Nautical Almanac in 1767, which was far better suited to practical use. However, it was still complicated. Thankfully, soon after, sailors began to use accurate sea clocks, like this one called a chronometer, pioneered by John Harrison. We can see Harrison's 4 remarkable timekeepers here in the Time and Longitude Gallery. We're going to come back here a bit later on and have a good look around, and we'll talk more about these then. Let's take a tour through Flamsteed House. We're going to start in the residence. Now, this was not only a place of scientific inquiry. It was a home for the families of the successive astronomers royal who worked here, some of whom we've already mentioned, like Flamsteed and Maskelyne, as well as Edmund Hawley. You know him from the Comet, and we'll come back to him a little bit later on. The first part of the house is currently curated to represent the Maskelyne family, who lived here while Patriarch Reverend Neville Maskelyne was the 5th astronomer royal between 1765 until his death in 1811. Here we can see different models of Flamsteed House, originally starting with Sir Christopher Wren's original design that consisted of just the dwelling rooms and the Great Star Chamber, and then being added to in different centuries. 1794, adding a kitchen and living room for the Maskelynes, and for the Airy families in 1846, 3 new bedrooms added. Today, we can see some biographies of different astronomers royal on the walls, but we're going to be focusing on a few in particular. Now note, you can probably hear the ticking clock behind me. Clocks are a common sight here at the Royal Observatory for obvious reasons, but in this room we can see this portrait above the mantel of Maskelyne's daughter, Margaret. In the portrait, she's situated here in Greenwich. You can see the Royal Observatory behind her. Now, she was the only child of Maskelyne and his wife, and she was very much doted upon. We can see her small astronomical model here in this case, given to her by her father. This is really sweet, and note that the model includes Uranus, which had only recently been identified by William Herschel. She also painted these watercolors that are on the back of the cabinet. Margaret was known to assist her father with his work here, and she clearly had a love of astronomy. Margaret wasn't the only girl who was interested in astronomy at the time. At the back of the case, you can see this small picture labeled Astronomy for Girls. This is representing Margaret Bryan. She was a keen advocate of girls' education, and she lived right nearby. One of her contributions to the museum is this copy of her board game that she devised called The Pleasures of Astronomy. This was created in the late 18th century, and it tests your knowledge of astronomy in order to reach this place here, Flamsteed House. If you were somebody in 18th century London and you were interested in the stars, Flamsteed House was a household name. On the wall here, we can see William Herschel. As I mentioned, he is the one who identified Uranus in the sky. Some other sites and references to the domestic life in this house. Remember, this wasn't only a place for science. It was a place where people lived for a long time. Over here, we can see some of Neville's homemade remedies. He wasn't just interested in the stars, he was somebody that was also keenly interested in the natural world. And I find interesting that today we still use a lot of these things. There's wisdom in some of these old methods. Not in all of them, but in some of them. You can see here that there's a home remedy for heartburn, using lemon for coughs, and even, well, now I've heard everything, tobacco for cleaning your teeth. You know, I always like when museums try to involve more than just your eyes and your ears, but also in this case, there's the smells. Some of you might remember from my Patreon video about the medieval women at the British Library, there were also smells incorporated. Let's give this a whiff. Well, I mean, for heartburn, it's rind of lemon, 2 teaspoons of ginger, and a quart of boiling water. And it smells absolutely lovely, as you could probably expect. What is the other one? For a weak stomach, 5 grains of chamomile flowers, 2 or 3 rhubarb, ginger, and some dill water. Again, seems like it smells pretty good. And it does. This is better than the London dungeon, which uses disgusting smells. Some more portraits of Neville and Sophia Maskelyne, and here, a dress worn by young Margaret when she was in her adolescence. It's beautiful and so lovely that it's survived. 18th century fashion doesn't always make it. Now we're in the next section of the home, which has been curated to look like the Airy family still lives here. This is representing Astronomer Royal George Biddle Airy. And can I just say that Airy is a wonderful last name for somebody who studies the skies. George Biddle Airy was the Astronomer Royal from 1835 to 1871. I mean, these guys had really long careers. We'll see his legendary Airy transit circle towards the end of our tour. Now in this photo above the mantle, we can see his children as young adults, as well as he and his wife, Ricarda. George and Ricarda had 9 children, but the first 3 died tragically young of childhood illnesses. Check out these small objects that he would have used when playing with his children. We all tend to do that, don't we? We love to engage our children in our own passions, hence why my daughter ends up in the museum a lot. Now we can see here a small camera lucida. He would have used this to entertain his children, but also for his work. A camera lucida is an optical device used as a drawing aid by artists and microscopists. There is also this small celestial globe. This is perfect for learning about the constellations, and I think this one is so beautiful. You can also see these cards here. When they're held up to the light, the pinholes in the constellation can show you the patterns reflected on the wall. These were really popular in the 19th century. Now, as we walk into the next room, we can see this grand portrait of George Biddle Airy, but then above the mantelpiece, a blown up photograph of his wife Ricarda at the end of her life. She had suffered a stroke at this point, and she was a storied beauty in her younger years. Her father actually wouldn't give her permission to marry Airy for 6 years. He didn't think that his prospects were good enough, but you can see here all of these different medals, awards, and honors in this case. So it turns out that Ricarda's father actually didn't really need to worry. Airy's later high position came with a lot of prestige. We're going to leave the domestic residence of Flamsteed House and head upstairs into arguably the most important room here at the Royal Observatory, the Octagon Room, also known historically as the Star Room. We're heading upstairs now to the Octagon Room. It's the oldest part of the Royal Observatory, completed in 1676. Its name used to be the Star Room, as this is, quite obviously, the perfect place for stargazing. This is the only surviving example of a Christopher Wren interior. And remember, Christopher Wren, who I've mentioned a few times, was the architect of such illustrious buildings as St. Paul's Cathedral, so this is quite a big deal. Christopher Wren said that this was for the observator's habitation and a little pomp. It really is special with these high ceilings that are designed to allow for long telescopes. You can see an example here, a replica with the ladder leaning against the window. This allows the telescope to be positioned to access all different parts of the night sky. It's funny, it's such a simple setup, but it's really rather ingenious. And you can actually see it in use over here with this illustration on the wall. You can see one of those astronomers royal using this. The high ceilings were also designed for some of the 17th century's most sophisticated clocks to be installed. They needed really long pendulums to keep time. The 8 sides of the room were designed to allow for an uninterrupted view of the night sky. Now, right above the door here, 2 royal portraits by Peter Lely used to hang, that of Charles II and his brother James II, but sadly the humidity in this room cannot be controlled enough to allow them to remain here. In the same drawing, which shows us the setup of the room, you can see these 2 portraits, and they would have just been above the doorway. However, we can see a reference to Charles here. Let's have a look way up where the molding meets the ceiling, next to these beautiful roses, although I do think Christopher Wren could have done something celestial, but with these beautiful roses, you can see the CR. This is the cipher of Charles II. CR was Charles Rex, and Rex, of course, is Latin for king. Here, we can see this large quadrant. This is essentially a movable metal frame. It has a scale running along the circular edge, and an astronomer could mount a telescope to this quadrant frame so that they could take accurate measurements of the sky. Now, believe it or not, this quadrant frame is actually scaled down. The one that was in this room in the 17th century was actually much larger. And just like the other objects in the room, you can see it being used by an astronomer in this drawing. In this room, there are a number of Tompion clocks. Thomas Tompion is known as the father of English clockmaking, and he likely crafted these in his Fleet Street workshop. Of course, accurate timekeeping is an essential, crucial part of astronomy, and astronomy is necessary for timekeeping. I mean, they really do work together. Today, our time is measured by the atomic clocks invented in the 1940s. But until that time, all time was determined by a careful calculation of the stars and the sun. The 2 clocks behind me, just to the left of the door, were actually 2 of Flamsteed's favorites. He said that since they only needed winding once per year, they, quote, kept good correspondence with the heavens. This helped him prove the theory that the Earth rotated at a constant rate. The pendulums are located above the dials. There's a little bit of glare there, but I'm trying to get the best view for you. There you go. These are just little replicas to show us how they work, because the originals had pendulums that were over 4 meters tall and swung back and forth, not side to side. These clocks are replicas, and that's because Flamsteed's widow, she successfully argued that since Flamsteed had paid for these Tompion clocks with his own money and of his own volition, that she should be allowed to keep them after his death. They were incredibly valuable, and I mean, good for her. So there's replicas here to show us what they looked like. Now, the guts, essentially, of this 1675 clock are on display so that we can have a good look at them. The clock gets its name, the year-going clock, because it can run for a year without being wound. It was designed by John Flamsteed and made for him by, of course, Thomas Tompion. These 2 pieces of the clock that we can see in the cabinet, the essentially inner workings of it, are known as the movement and the mechanism. Now let's have a closer look at a clock case. Here is what we would typically in modern English call a grandfather clock. It has a long wooden case to house the swinging pendulum. The longer the pendulum, the more accurate the time, and that's why these wooden cases were devised to house them. Now this is another Flamsteed-designed Tompion clock. This is called the sidereal degree clock. The clock face looks a little strange. That's because instead of the typical 24-hour clock face, it divides the Earth's daily rotation into 360 degrees, and then further divides that down into arc minutes and arc seconds. The Royal Observatory wasn't always open to the public as a museum as it is today. Here is an image of Queen Elizabeth II visiting this very room, the Octagon Room, when the Royal Observatory opened in 1960. We can also see this image of Annie S.D. Russell. She was one of 4, quote, lady computers, mathematicians who worked here in the Octagon Room analyzing data and photographs. This photo from around 1890. It's time to leave the historic rooms and head into the museum section. This is the Time and Longitude Gallery. In this gallery, we can see hundreds of different artifacts referencing the history of time and astronomy. But most importantly, we're coming back to that question of longitude. Just as a little refresher for something we've already spoken about, as the Earth rotates 360 degrees every day, divided that into 24 hours, each hour is 15 degrees. And therefore, every degree can give us 4 minutes of local time difference. So if you know the local time at 2 different places on Earth, you immediately know the degree between them. For instance, Greenwich here in London and Greenwich Village in New York, they have a 5-hour time difference, so that represents about 75 degrees of longitude. By the early 18th century, the most accurate clocks in the world were pendulum clocks, just like we saw upstairs in the Octagon Room. However, there's a real problem when you try to use pendulum clocks on a ship. This little device really depicts the problem with using a pendulum clock at sea. As the ship lists from side to side, you can see that the pendulum is just struggling to keep time and ultimately failing. It's pretty easy to maintain your local time when you're at sea on a ship. We will talk about the problem with pendulums, but you can probably figure out your own local time. The problem lies in finding out the local time of other places around the world. This is where all of the difficulty and the guesswork came into play. Today it is still possible to navigate using star charts, of course it is, and lots of indigenous people around the world still use the stars for navigation. However, it's accurate, but not quite accurate enough. Navigational tools like this, the backstaff, could be used to try to find the sun's angle on the horizon. Also, of course, maps, logbooks, even magnets were all used with an attempt to try to understand both latitude, longitude, and local time. But of course, it wasn't always successful. Let's have a look here at the Shovell disaster, also known as the Scilly naval disaster of 1707. Remember, shipwrecks were a massive problem. Even the most skilled sea captains weren't able to easily navigate before the invention of chronometers. But this one has been called the shipwreck that changed the world. Even though the ship was only a few miles from shore, the HMS Association, captained by him, Sir Cloudesley Shovell, as well as 3 other ships, the Eagle, the Romney, and the Firebrand, were sailing from Gibraltar back to England, past the Isles of Scilly. Now, these are the very southern islands of Great Britain, known to be treacherous. Between 1,400 and 2,000 men lost their lives on that very day, 22nd October 1707, as the ships were dashed across the sharp rocks. This disaster shocked the world. People were absolutely devastated, and it led to a renewed push to better understand and calculate longitude. After the Scilly naval disaster, the government decided to try to put some money behind their quest for the search for longitude. In 1714, they put forward an offer of £20,000 for anybody who could develop an accurate sea clock. They attracted submissions from people all over the country, some really measured, pun intended, and well-researched, others from the, quote, lunatic fringe. Now on my channel, whenever we talk about the 18th century, we reliably know we're going to talk about William Hogarth. That's just because his satirical comics and satirical drawings illustrate so many different aspects of London life in the 18th century. And in this one here, we can see people, insensitively depicted of course, at the Bedlam Lunatics Asylum. We can see a few women who are probably here for the afternoon of sightseeing. Yes, going to watch people in mental institutions was a common hobby, but also here in plate 8 of A Rake's Progress, we can see this gentleman here. He's one of the inmates of Bedlam Asylum, and he's sketching out his ideas for the Longitude reward on the wall. This is obviously Hogarth mocking the idea that the average person would be able to solve this problem. Let's have a look at arguably the most important objects here in the Longitude Gallery. The very first chronometers. These are called the 4 Harrison clocks. John Harrison was a carpenter and a self-taught clockmaker from Lincolnshire. He made accurate long case clocks or grandfather clocks and had solved a lot of the problems with how to keep them accurate even in changing temperatures. He spent 45 years of his life developing clocks that could work more accurately at sea. These 4 different cases running down the center of the room are Harrison's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, while H1, H2, H3, and H4 don't have the most exciting names, what they did revolutionized seafaring and changed our world forever. Everything that you order from Amazon, every cup of tea that you drink, every imported item that you use, you can thank John Harrison for the fact that it arrives here reliably and safely. This is his first timekeeper, otherwise known as H1. And this took him about 5 years to build. It was tested in 1736 in a voyage to Lisbon and back. And Harrison, poor guy, like me, got very seasick the whole journey, but best of all, his timekeeper worked. It was the most accurate sea clock ever made at that point. That said, being accurate enough wasn't enough to win that £20,000. Harrison wasn't deterred though. He was given a grant of £250 to develop his next timekeeper, H2, this one here in the cabinet. It improved upon the first sea clock and took his advancements to the next level. This one was completed in 1737 to 1740, but it wasn't perfect yet. Now, of course, we've got to move on to H3, which does what it says on the tin. That's Harrison's third timekeeper. Now, you might have noticed that between H1 and H2, there was just a few years, but this one took a lot longer, 19 years. You can see that instead of a typical pendulum, this one's kind of rocking back and forth. After sinking 19 years of work into this one, H3, Harrison had a light bulb moment. Were light bulbs even invented then? I don't think so, but he had a light bulb moment anyways. He realized that part of the problem of these clocks and why they weren't working to the most accurate that they could be was because they were simply too heavy. He decided to go back to the drawing board and start something radically different. Remember, here are images of the first 3 Harrison clocks. Look at the size, look at the shapes. Now let's look at H4. Your eyes are not playing tricks on you. We go from these large, almost steampunk machines. They're huge. They're larger than a microwave. They're larger than 2 microwaves. Why can't I think of anything but a microwave? To something that could fit in a really large pocket. This is the most important timepiece ever made. Really is more like a watch than a big clock. Harrison had finally done it. He was awarded the £20,000 reward originally offered back in 1714. Longitude could finally be calculated reliably. It still wasn't perfect, of course. It's not the atomic clock, but it is the precursor to the modern instruments that we use to navigate the globe and also just live our lives with the objects that we have imported from around the world. There's nothing in your home that's been delivered by Amazon that hasn't been made possible by the H4 timekeeper. The H1 timekeeper would ultimately mean that any well-trained navigator could determine longitude at sea. It was no longer something that needed vast amounts of mathematical knowledge and luck. And finally, before we leave this gallery, we can just start to look at some very handsome 19th century chronometers. This one here, used by the Royal Navy for over 100 years. Just at the bottom of the stairs below the Longitude Gallery, we can see another gallery dedicated to time and Greenwich. The gallery is filled with a number of different clocks that show us the progression of timekeeping, local time and international time from the 17th century into the present. Pendulum clocks have really come a long way. This one here, designed in Moscow in the 1950s, is called the Fedchenko pendulum clock. These were commonly used for Soviet government purposes, as well as timekeeping and television production, right up until the 1970s. Now that we've toured Flamsteed House, let's have a good look around the courtyard. We can see the iconic time ball on top of the roof, but what is it? In 1833, the observatory had a brilliant idea. To help everyone set their chronometers and ensure that they were accurate, which therefore ensured their longitude was accurate, they installed this large red time ball, and it drops every day at precisely 1 p.m. If you're moored in the Thames, you can pull out your spyglass and watch it drop, allowing you to check your own timepieces and set them against this one. Now, I'm going to let this very learned gentleman tell you even more about the time ball as we wait for it to drop.
Time ball was put there in 1833 to be Greenwich's first attempt at disseminating time, at telling people locally what the time was. And on board each of those ships, there would be a navigator with at least one what we call chronometer, which is an extremely accurate clock for telling the time at sea. And what they need to do before they set off is to check the rate of their chronometers. Are they running fast or are they running slow? They're not going to stop them or rewind them. You might never get them started again. But you just want to know, are they going fast or going slow? Then you can use them in your calculations of longitude and set off and have your amazing adventures in far-off lands. So that's where this comes in. In 1833, it was installed by John Pond, the 6th Astronomer Royal. And the way it works is, it goes halfway up the mast at 5 minutes to 1. And what that says to all the navigators down there is, get ready. We're about to check the time. We're about to synchronise all our clocks. At 2 minutes to, oh, here we go, we're going up. At 2 minutes to 1, it goes to the top of the mast. And what that says to the navigators is, no, really get ready, it's about to happen. And then at 1 o'clock precisely, fingers crossed, the ball drops, and that tells the navigators it's 1 o'clock, check your chronometers, off you go. So you might notice that it's a little bit dented, looks a bit battered about. Well, that's because it's been battered about, okay? It was in 1959, there was extensive renovations done, and the builders very carefully built scaffolding up to the time ball, very carefully brought it down, and then very carefully rolled it across the courtyard, over all the cobblestones. There's a theory that also they played football with it, but I don't believe that, because it's about 5 feet in diameter, it's very big, and it's very heavy as well. So the current ball was put up just after the First World War, made out of aluminium to replace the canvas ball, and that's the one you see today. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go! Yay! Wasn't that exciting?
Oh.
Okay. Right, thank you everyone.
Now that we've seen it drop, in 1852 the observatory began sending telegram signals around the country, and then the globe, to help people all over the world set their clocks. We're going to come back to that with the shepherd clock in a few minutes, and the phrase Greenwich Mean Time began to be used. Now you simply cannot come to Greenwich without coming up to the Royal Observatory, especially to get this iconic view. We can see quite a few different London landmarks on the skyline, and they're helpfully illustrated for us by this map. straight ahead in the distance, just that way. In front of us with the 4 smokestack, that is the Greenwich Power Station. And just beyond that, further, deceptively further than it looks, is the Millennium Dome, a massive sporting, concert and entertainment stadium. Then, just a little bit this direction, we can see One Canada Square and the Docklands, including Canary Wharf, which I always refer to as City of London Junior. This is a secondary financial district. But to get to the main financial district in London, we have to head this direction, and we can see far in the distance things like the Walkie-Talkie, the Gherkin, and many other London iconic skyscrapers. The River Thames winds in front of us. Much further in the distance, we can see St. Paul's Cathedral, Tower Bridge, and even Hampstead Heath. Now, one of the things we can see just in the foreground before this amazing vista is the Queen's House. Let's go into the camera obscura to have an unusual look at the Queen's House. I've spoken about camera obscuras on my channel before, in particular with the suggestion that Johannes Vermeer may have used them in order to make even more accurate paintings of his models. But camera obscura is Latin for dark room. In this case, a mirror on the roof collects and reflects light down through a lens that reproduces the image on the table below. And this has been used since ancient China. People realized that sunlight shining through a tiny hole in the wall could be used to project outside views inside a room. This camera obscura here at Greenwich has been used for over 300 years. Flamsteed was able to observe the sun safely by using this camera obscura. Let's go inside. Ah, there it is, you can see it. Took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust, just like the sign said it would. A perfect, though faint, representation of the Queen's House. The Meridian line beneath my feet here at Greenwich, the famous one where everyone takes their photos, was set out by George Biddle Airy. We can see all different cities around the world and look at their latitude and longitude here. Let me know what city in the world you're watching from and if you can see your hometown or your current location here beneath my feet. Oh, Reykjavik, pretty far north here. But what exactly is the Prime Meridian? I mean, we know that it's this line on the ground beneath my feet, but what actually is it? Essentially, it's kind of an imaginary theoretical line that runs from north to south around the planet, and it's used as a reference line for astronomical observations. If you regularly watch and measure when a star crosses over this line, then you can create an accurate map of the sky. The meridian can also be a way to measure longitude, and that's really the crux of this entire observatory. Think of it this way. The equator separates the northern and southern hemisphere, and this line here, the Prime Meridian, separates the eastern and western hemispheres. It's represented by a metal line on the ground, and if I was here at night, I would see that it's represented by a laser that shoots out of the Airy telescope room. Check it out on a clear night. It can be seen from 20 kilometers away. Right now, I have 1 foot in the east and 1 in the west. The line passes through 8 countries and crosses 3 continents, but 2/3 of it is in the sea. It was all possible because of this man here. Now, we've already learned about him. This is George Biddle Airy. He was the Astronomer Royal from 1835 to 1871. He designed this telescope in 1850 and used it to observe the sky. It was known as the Airy Transit Circle. Remember, the transit is when a star passes over the Royal Observatory. It was used for more than 100 years and made around 600,000 observations. This machine defined the Greenwich Meridian. The telescope is attached to a circular frame that's mounted on an east-west horizontal axis, allowing it to raise or lower on the same plane as the meridian. Now back outside, we can see that this is not the only meridian here at Greenwich. There are 2 others established before Airy's. You can see these different pedestals. These show you the different meridian lines that have been determined. Airy's instruments and telescopes were more sophisticated than theirs, but theirs are also important to the history. The 3rd Astronomer Royal was James Bradley. I'm standing right now on Bradley's meridian line. Bradley used this telescope to map over 3,000 new stars, as well as determine his meridian line that we're standing on right now. His data was adopted by the National Mapping Agency Ordnance Survey as 0 degrees longitude. They actually still use it today, rather than the Airy Meridian or this one, which is actually more accurate. And here, measured by this line on the wall straight ahead, this is Edmund Hawley's meridian line. These large quadrants were used by astronomer Edmund Halley. Remember, he was the second astronomer royal. When he came to work here in 1720, he discovered that the Royal Observatory was actually in quite a state of disrepair. Many of the buildings were crumbling, and Flamsteed's instruments were not kept in good condition. He set upon an ambitious 18-year program mapping the stars using quadrants like these. However, while Hawley, or sometimes people say Halley or even Halley, is famous for Halley's Comet, most of his calculations and observations were actually unusable because he and his assistants were rather careless when it came to setting and maintaining their clocks. Now, we've seen a memorial in the past to Edmund Hawley when I did the oddities of Westminster Abbey. But this is his family's tomb. This was moved to the observatory from the churchyard of St. Margaret's in Lee. That's where Edmund Hawley's tomb was restored by the Lord Commissioners of the Admiralty in 1854. Though the actual tomb is still in place in Lee with a replica tombstone, this original tombstone is here, where he did his most important life's work. Just remember, any north-south line can be used as a meridian, but why is this the prime meridian? Well, in 1884, a group of British notables decided that the meridian line running through Airy's telescope at Greenwich should be the main, or prime, meridian for the whole world. They wanted this to be 0 degrees, from which all locations east and west would be measured. But there was controversy about that. The discussions went on for weeks, and even though most of the delegates agreed that the prime meridian should be here in Greenwich, after all, most of the world was already using charts based on this location, France didn't actually want to agree upon Greenwich Mean Time. They argued hard for the Paris meridian, you can see it here, which had indeed been used in France and other places around the world for centuries. They held out, but eventually they saw that it just made more sense for the world to use one meridian. So here you can see a little placard that talks about sat-nav, or we would probably just say GPS today. I think sat-nav is a little bit of an outdated term. But if you hold up your phone here, you can see that it will tell you that you're not actually standing at longitude 0. And that's because today, modern satellite navigation uses satellite data and takes the Earth's slightly irregular shape into account. So the actual satellite meridian is about 100 meters further east from where we're standing right now. But don't tell this lovely line here that. This is still a very important one. Now, on the other side of these mechanics, we can see the famous clock face, as well as a set of standard measurements. These really remind me of the ones in my Trafalgar Square video that I recently posted. This is an early example of an electrically connected clock system. It was originally controlled by the main motor clock inside, which was sending it electrical pulses. It's called the Shepherd clock because Charles Shepherd installed it in 1852. Interestingly, it shows the 24-hour analog dial, and it also originally showed astronomical time, which started at noon, not midnight. These were sometimes called master and slave clocks, and Shepherd first developed this technology for the 1851 Great Exhibition, aka the Crystal Palace Exhibition in London. Shepherd worked with Airy to create this system with the idea of transmitting time pulses from Greenwich to all other clocks throughout the country and around the world, allowing longitude distances to be measured accurately for the first time. This is a real tourist hotspot. You don't have to pay the admission fee to come and take your photo at this clock, so you can see it draws a crowd. Ahead of me here is the Altazimuth Pavillion, which was completed in 1899. It originally contained an Altazimuth telescope, but today it contains a photoheliograph telescope, which is used for photographing the sun. Here's an image of the original Altazimuth telescope that used to be inside this pavilion. The name Altazimuth refers to how astronomers moved the original telescope across the sky. It's a portmanteau of the word altitude and azimuth. An azimuth is a horizontal angle from a cardinal direction in a spherical coordinate system. I won't be answering any further questions on that. I'm just heading up a very tiny, narrow little set of stairs here to go to the Great Equatorial Telescope. Oh, wow. This is the Great Equatorial Telescope, and while we have far more modern telescopes for use today, I want you to imagine yourself back in 1893 witnessing this huge iron contraption. This would have blown your mind. This was the height of science and technology. People really felt like they were living in the future using something as technologically advanced as this. It was originally designed by the astronomer royal, Sir William Christie, and he wanted to use it to photograph stars, but it wasn't ideal for that purpose. So for the next 50 years, it was used to track double stars, planets, and comets. So if you're interested in the history of stargazing and you'd like to come and use this, it actually is still available for use if you book special stargazing evenings. Check out the website of the Royal Observatory to see if you can book one of those. There's no guarantee that you'll be invited to relax as much as this observer at work during the 1920s. While this telescope and the one in the Altazimuth Pavillion were used until the 1940s, by that point the light and air pollution of London was just too much, and the Royal Observatory's research team officially relocated to a site in Hurstmonceux, then to Cambridge in 1990, and finally all the way to the Canary Islands. But while the research may be carried out abroad, the heart and soul of the Royal Observatory is still here in Greenwich, and that is the perfect place to end our tour. Well, that's the end of our tour here at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich on a rather windy day. I hope you enjoyed learning about the history of time, maritime navigation, and the Prime Meridian. Most importantly, happy 350th anniversary to the Royal Observatory. I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum.